and all the powers concentrated. Okay, so this is something very important to keep in mind as we think about what is happening in Morocco. In fact, what is happening in Morocco, and this is a third or fourth concept that I would like to add. The new king came to power in 1999, when the old king Hassan II, okay, died. Then Mohammed VI came to power, and since the coming of Mohammed VI, there was talk about lots of reforms. Okay, and in fact, initially Mohammed VI appeared as a more liberal monarch, and it is true. He does seem to be, and he has shown that that he is a more liberal monarch in comparison to Hassan II, and he engaged in a number of different reforms. Okay, however, one of the reforms, and when I'm speaking about engaging in a number of different reforms, he dealt a little bit with the human rights issues, but more importantly, what he concentrated on was economic reforms. Okay, and he engaged more specifically, like other countries in the Middle East, like Egypt, like Tunisia, with the so-called structural adjustment programs. Structural adjustment programs. This is the typical, what we can call in basic language, liberalization of the economy, getting rid of the state. Yeah? And since then, I mean, the structural adjustment program in fact started earlier, but he pushes them further. The structural adjustment program started under Hassan II, but he took it more further. With more liberalization, with more market-oriented economy. And there was something that took place which I personally like to call the technocratic turn. Okay? Technocratic turn. I just made up this word, I like it. Technocratic term. The technocratic term for me is an attempt to deal mainly with development issues, yes, with providing, trying to deal with the basic infrastructure. Also, it has to do with the fact that politicians were no longer sought after, but instead technocrats who were that the regime, that the palace was inviting to take key positions, yes. And this came within these economic reforms. And there was a lid that was put on political reforms. Okay? Because everybody was speaking, yes, we need, because as it is generally mentioned, and this would apply not only to Morocco, but I would say to a larger Middle Eastern context, it was believed that Moroccans, they need just jobs and they need to have to eat, and this is what they need. Okay, so who cares about democracy? If you provide them with jobs, they are not going to ask for real political reforms. And this is one of the stereotypical views again that I would challenge in a very big way. Okay? Because sometimes economists like to refer to it, it's the economy stupid. This is the preferred phrase. I totally disagree with this kind of thing. I do not think that people in the Middle East and just want the better job. I think they want more than that. And for me, this kind of argument, even though I'm not trying to suggest it's wrong. Of course, people like to have jobs. But I do not think that it is the only thing that they want. It is, for me, very reductionist and honestly very essentialist. Yes?
Another question related to the economic reforms and structural programs. So you mentioned that the king has actually many titles. Amir al-Mu'minin and head of state, head of armed forces, etc. And he's also the biggest businessman.
Exactly, yes. Yes.
So and I'm wondering now, since this has happened over the last 10 years with the new king, as I understand, he is much more engaged into business.
Oh, yes.
So can it be that there is a try to, since there is some kind of opening up of the political sphere, try to keep influence over through the economic sphere, since there is a kind of loss in the political sphere?
Well, one of the points that was raised by the February 20th movement is the close relationship of the palace and the regime with the economics, because basically this is a political economy of things. Yes, there is a major investment by the palace within the context of these reforms. Okay, these economic reforms, and as I mentioned, this February 20th movement challenged. One of the slogans is to separate economics. I mean, a good book that came out about, I think, a year is called Le Roi Prédateur, Predatory King, and it came out in France, which speaks about the predatory aspects of the regime and the monarchy in terms of economics. And behind this is an institution that is called ONA, which is Omnium Nord-Africain, North African Omnium, which is really concentrates a number of different fields, financial, agro-industries, but this is another interesting side of the debate which I have decided to put aside, but that can be also in itself very interesting. In any way, Le Roi Prédateur is something that and I was just told recently that, in fact, his brother is sometimes, among some circles, business circles, is referred to as Mr. 9%. Otherwise, that whenever there is a project, he has to have 9% of. But honestly, I cannot rely on this. This is just based on rumors. But this is what is. The point is that there is this important aspect also of the regime.
Sorry.
Yes?
My basic question, and would it be possible, I think, to counterbalance a loss of political control and power through a strong influence in the economic field?
It's, I don't think, first of all, I don't think that the king has lost any political power. And I do not think that they are going to lose, to give up the economic field. They are readjusting themselves. And here is another characteristic of the Moroccan monarchy, is the ability to readjust itself depending on the changing political and social environment. So it is a monarchy that is, I would call, intelligent. There is already, and this is another concept that I can throw at you, that political scientists have started to distinguish, one political scientist at least in the US, to distinguish recently between what he calls hard authoritarianism and soft authoritarianism. So otherwise Morocco would fit within the soft authoritarianism. And what is meant by the soft authoritarianism is the fact that it is not using violence as hard authoritarianism, like this deranged persons. I'm sorry, but with Syria, because I am very critical of Bashar, who is killing young babies and older women, and so there is which would be hard authoritarianism. So would, for example, somebody like clearly Gaddafi would fit within hard authoritarianism. I would call it also intelligent authoritarianism. I think Moroccan political system and the Moroccan Makhzen is more intelligent, I think, and they have been able to do it. So anyway, to go back to what I was speaking about, these processes, this technocratic turn, okay, this is where I stopped. The technocratic turn has led in a parallel to another phenomena in Morocco since 1999 up to 2011, it has led to another phenomena which I would call the depolitization of Moroccan politics. Depolitization, okay? So depolitization, what I mean by depolitization is that within all this period, up to 2011, up to the February, all the parties also did not ask for constitutional reform. In fact, they put aside the political issues, and what were they concentrating on? Jobs, the economy, you see? And very rarely, with a few exceptions, more liberal and left-wing parties, which represent a small minority, who spoke about politics. But the rest, the majority of the political party, all went with this logic of the regime of Moroccans need jobs, they need... so the point is that this phase between 1999, when the new regime, when the new king came, up to 2011, is what I would call a period of depolitization. And in this sense, February the 20th movement has contributed, in this sense, to a repoliticization of the Moroccan politics. But from a different angle. It's not the parties who are engaging in this, but it is, and I will explain it in the next concept, it is from another perspective, okay? It's coming from another perspective, okay? So, I think these are important notions, and I think I will move to the next. Which brings me, in fact, since we are speaking about politics and another kind of politics, to introduce you to another concept, or two different concepts that are, for me, captures what is happening in Morocco. Okay? And I would, again, these two concepts are mine. They came from an article that I wrote recently, and I wanted to share them with you. I would say that in the context of Morocco, one can today make a distinction between what I would call consensus politics, okay? Consensus politics, and versus, yes? Subaltern politics, okay? So what do I mean by consensus politics versus subaltern politics? The fact that we have had, I would say since the early 1990s, this process toward depolitization that took place between 1999 and was predated by another process, what I would call the domestication of the Moroccan parties. Okay? The domestication of the Moroccan parties, it means that gradually Moroccan political parties, whether from the left or the right or the conservative, could no longer create any major challenge to the monarchy. Okay? In the 1960s, you have left-wing political parties, USFP, Union Socialiste des Forces Populaires, who would create always an alternative, who were challenged, and a number of them, in fact, were jailed, and some of them lost their lives. But there was, in Moroccan political field, a kind of a discourse, a political discourse, and what I would call a counter-discourse, yes? Providing alternative, providing different points of views, different agendas. But gradually, because of this domestication of the political parties, we have, in fact, ultimately by 1999, and more further by 2011, we have, in fact, ended up with what I would call consensus politics. So what do I mean by consensus politics? Once the monarch speaks, gives a talk, speech, all the parties coalesce and start supporting everything that the monarch has. So this is what I mean by consensus politics. And this consensus politics, in fact, there is also a constitutional component to it. Because in the 1996 constitution, the speeches of the king constitutionally cannot be debated. Okay? So if the king gives a speech, you cannot debate the speech of. And this particular article is reproduced exactly in the 2011 new constitution. I'm starting to showing my critique. Okay? So, and this has ultimately contributed to consensus politics. Now, of course, the fact that we say that we have constitutional reform, the fact that the king can do this, it means for me not just it is a question about what the king can do or cannot do, but also it means for me the gradual and emerging predisposition of the parties to allow themselves to do this. Because if you don't want, you can challenge. But they gradually have absorbed this, and even though there is an article in the constitution, they can challenge that. But it's no longer happening. It has never been, since the early 1990s, what we have is this consensus politics around everything that the king says, everything is wonderful. Now, my point is that I'm not suggesting that the king might not have wonderful ideas. On the contrary, he can, and the palace can provide very good ideas. But for me, the very reason, the very fact that any kind of reasonable politics require a debate, for me, is essential. And there are a number of cases, of course, where one can challenge and disagree with what the king has said. So, consensus politics, the domestication of the parties, all of this is important to think about when thinking about Morocco. And maybe this consensus politics has, in a way, one reason for the existence of the consensus politics. As I told you, it's not just the power of the palace, but it's also the predisposition of the parties. Because the political parties have, in a way, become, they have engaged in what an old philosopher of Europe, Etienne de la Boétie, calls voluntary servitude. He's a 16th century political philosopher who spoke about monarchies in Europe, but he made a very interesting point. He said that if monarchies can have this, kind of regimes, what was called the Ancien Régime, yes? If monarchies can do that, it means that there are a political leadership and the nobility who have also voluntary, they are accepting this servitude. So if you want to apply this to the Moroccan political parties in the 21st century, the fact that there is consensus politics, honestly, is because the political parties have accepted what is called a voluntary servitude. A good example about this is an anecdote. I was watching a program in the Moroccan TV. It's called Maison Caux. In French, maison. And basically, this program is organized by a journalist. Well, not journalist. He's a lawyer, but he turned and he has this show in Morocco late at night at 9. And what he does is that he invites every now and then either a political figure or an artist or a novelist, and he engaged on one-on-one kind of interview. And in one of these interviews, there was this young Youssef Bey. Youssef Bey is the Socialist Party in Morocco, who was the guest. And just by coincidence, I was listening and I wanted to hear. And in this interview, the Youssef Bey leader, who was a key leader, and in fact he was minister, he said something that is very real. He said, you know what? He said it to the person. He told them, you know what? If you go to France today, I'm almost sure they would like to have their monarchy back. Okay? And this is a person who is from the left, from the socialist. And for me, if the socialist, a member of the Socialist Party is saying this in Morocco, when the socialists in the 1960s were asking for real parliamentary democracy, and in fact somebody lost his life of that, and he is the symbol of the USFP party. He was killed by the regime. What's his name? I can't think of his name. Who was killed in Paris? What's his name? It's a famous case, and they made a movie out of it, but I cannot think of his name. Ben Barka. Yes, Ben Barka. Because Ben Barka lost his life and was killed because he was asking for real parliamentary democracy, for a real power in the hand of the prime minister, and for having a monarch not with the same sort of power that he had. So if that is the historical background of the USFP, and then you end up with somebody saying this kind of, it clearly speaks about this consensus politics. Now, gradually, yes?
But I think you told before that it's a very intelligent monarchy, and when they are achieving that economically it's good for the people what they are doing, it's difficult for the leftists to criticize the monarchy because they are doing already what...
I'm sorry, can you repeat?
And you told before that it's a very intelligent monarchy at the moment. And
it's very?
Intelligent.
Intelligent, yes, yes.
And when they are reaching with their politics that the people in the street have a better life economically, it is difficult for the social parties to go against the monarchy because the daily life is getting better thanks to what the monarchy is doing.
But what makes you think that daily life is getting better?
You told before that economically...
economic reforms, but economic reforms, it's like the famous argument in the United States. Who is from the United States? The idea of trickle-down economics, the idea of trickle-down economics, otherwise that if you give a good tax and then people at the will get the benefit. But people keep waiting for the money to trickle down.
Okay,
so I think, yes, while there are, I do not mean to suggest, yes, there are some major projects, but there are still major disparity between the rich and the poor. We can speak today of the phenomena of the working poor, people who are working, but who are basically having the number of people, the so-called dead boats, people who are trying to go to Europe to find jobs and who die as a result of this, are continuing. There is major social malaise among members. You see, so now, of course, there are some aspects positive, but there are still major problems, and the informal sector that is also there. The fact that unemployment is very high. So there are major problems. So I was saying that. What was I saying? Yeah. So the fact that we have this consensus politics, I think one important aspect to understand the February 20th movement, yes, is to consider it as a part of subaltern politics. Okay? So what do I mean by subaltern politics? I mean by it mainly the fact that it is outside the institutional framework. Okay? Otherwise, it is a form of politics that is outside political parties. It is because political parties are into consensus politics. So subaltern politics, first of all, subaltern politics is also the idea that it comes from below. Okay, it's not from above. And the second aspect of of subaltern politics, it is outside political parties. It is in a way, as the French philosopher, what's his name? I don't know if you are familiar with him. His name is Alain Badiou. Alain Badiou. It's another way of doing politics that is outside the institutional framework, that is outside of party politics, that is dominant by palace politics, by consensus politics. So the February 20th movement came from different political and ideological movements, and it is outside of politics, and it is providing new alternatives that the political parties could no longer provide. It is providing a counter discourse that the parties were no longer doing. It is asking for political reforms, major political reforms, for the separation of powers that the parties are not doing. It is asking for the separation between palace politics and the business that the parties are not asking for. And all of this is really what the February 22 movement was about. And in this sense, these subaltern politics contributed to, as I told you, to a re-politicization of the political field. Okay? And for me, it's important to think about these issues as one should. Now, another interesting difference that should help us understand the Moroccan political system is, and the recent constitutional reform, is the difference between formal institutions versus informal institutions. Okay? So, formal institutions in the Moroccan political context would be the different ministries, the parliament, yes? And informal, these are positions that are not necessarily in the constitution, but they have a very good power. For example, advisor to the king. Okay? Advisors. And very interestingly, soon after the reforms of the constitution, and soon after the emergence of the PJD, you know, the new party, the Islamists, in parallel, literally, there was a number of new advisors that were given key positions. Foreign policy, economy, these are advisors, and the advisors to the kings do not even exist in constitutions. These are given directly by the monarch through a dahir. Dahir, that's another aspect of the political system. Dahirs are legal sort of codes that is directly stated by the monarch. And it is not debated. So if the monarch gives a dahir, it becomes a law automatically. Okay? And the position of this is given by dahir. Okay? It's a kind of legal code that is only the king can do, and nobody can debate that. Okay? So the positions of advisors in parallel were given as while the head of the Islamist party, the PJD, was looking for his government. There were advisors that were, which suggests clearly, which is very clear, they start calling this the shadow government. And this is the real government. The real power. And this is within not formal institution, it is within informal institution. Yes?
Just a question for understanding. This informal, or these advisors to the king, are they chosen by the Maghzen or are they given by the political parties?
No. The political parties, no, by the Maghzen, by the king.
The Maghzen chooses these
yes,
new
it's
advisors?
the king, yes.
Okay.
And in fact, the latest news, is there somebody from France here? No? But it's still only a rumor that that the king has approached Sarkozy.
No.
I don't believe it, but this is really it's written in the sort of, I think, Facebook or but I don't trust it. But it is true that Sarkozy has bought a house recently in Marrakesh and he is planning to live there. But I don't believe in this. But this is a rumor. This rumor is fresh. It just came out yesterday. But I don't believe in it, honestly. But anyway, the point is that advisors and the number of key institutions clearly are assigned by the king. Okay? So I think in order to understand Moroccan politics and in order to understand constitutional reforms, we have to think. So here is so if you want to placate the constitutional reform, or if you want to placate this concept on the constitutional reform, yeah, Listen, so for example, the process of constitutional reform, the recent constitutional reform in Morocco, formally it involved political parties, yes? So otherwise, there is a show and the TV and it shows people, the different representatives of the parties are coming to provide with ideas about what the constitution should be like. This is before the constitution, yeah? And there is this whole performance, what I would call the performance of politics, you know? And different political actors come within the formal institution to provide. But where are the decision makers? In the informal setting. Because the final outcome of the constitution was in fact done in the palace, within the palace circles. Okay? And the irony is that some changes that were made in the new constitutions, even the people who were a part of the drafting of the constitutions did not know about it, because they gave one draft and they end up with another, because it was within palace circles that the outcome was decided. Okay? So at least one essential component to criticize the constitutional reform in Morocco is the very procedures, because there is what I would call, what political scientists call procedural aspect, which is very problematic. Okay? Yes, there is the show, we are asking for people their input, but then there is the reality, which is that the ultimate constitution was made within the Maghzen, yes, within palace circles. Okay? So this is something very important to think about as we are thinking about constitutional reform, which in fact at this point would bring me to a final concept that I wanted to share with you, which relates to the fact that politics have become a kind of a performative. There is a performative aspect, and political actors are literally playing roles. Okay, so the head of the government, or from the PGD, from the Islamist party, is playing a role. He knows that he doesn't have power, and not only that, he said it. He said. People act like they are, they have positions and there is debate, but we know that the decisions are made outside of formal political institutions, and it becomes... So the performative aspect of politics in Morocco is very essential, I think, and honestly now I can, not only political scientists speak of the political field, and I honestly now like to talk about the political theater, in the sense that there is, people are performing and everybody has a role to play, but we know where decisions are made and where... yes, you had the question?
Yes, about the informal institutions. Would you consider the so-called delegate ministers as informal institutions?
No, delegate ministers are part of the formal institutions, because they are, in fact, part of the government. But I would make a distinction, again, which is very interesting, again, to understand the Moroccan political system. I honestly can make a distinction in Morocco between state and government. Okay? So the state is the Maghzen, it's the regime, yes, where real power. And the government is the head, of the PGD or the Islamists. And the government really, in this system, functions like what? Well, they are like functionaries. Okay? So honestly, whether you have a communist, as I mentioned, or an anarchist, or an Islamist party, it doesn't matter.